I just wanted to provide some additional information and context into the East Palestine train derailment. There's so much really to get into that I could spend like probably 2 hours talking about it or something. First, let's establish the timeline. On February 3rd at 8:52 p.m., an overheating wheel bearing caused the derailment. This is partly because Norfolk Southern skipped any possible inspection they could have had leading up to this point, and partially because it's Civil War era technology. At 9:04 p.m., 12 minutes later, dispatch calls Norfolk Southern to make them aware of the derailment. Local police were notified at 1:30 in the morning. So the fire chief didn't find, he found a piece of paper on his desk at 2:15 talking about the derailment. He knew nothing about it. When emergency personnel arrived, they weren't provided a manifest, which is a list of the chemicals and where they are in the train. Very quickly after the derailment, Norfolk Southern was in contact with their own contractors. And why would you be in contact with your own contractors but not emergency personnel? Is it because you're trying to cover something up? Allegedly. So at this point, 38 of the train's cars have derailed, 11 of which are carrying hazardous material. This caused fires and damage to the train. And residents, even at this point, were beginning to smell and inhale these toxic fumes. The next day, the EPA arrives to begin testing and observing the area. But as we'll talk about soon, their testing was far from adequate. On February 5th, officials issue a stay-in-home order for the town of 5,000, as well as an evacuation order for the 1-mile radius around the evacuation site. The following day, February 6th, was a complete catastrophe. Chief Keith Dravick is essentially in charge at the site. He's essentially tricked into a vent and burn under the false assumption that the trains were going to explode. He was also given 13 minutes to make the choice. Norfolk Southern was also speaking to the chemical manufacturer directly, who told them not to do the vent and burn. The original plan was to conduct the vent and burn at 12 noon when children were in school and people were at work. The initial derailment was probably tear-inducing enough, but the actual vent and burn made the town look like hell. If you haven't already, go check out some drone footage of it. It's pretty crazy. Black fog, like smog, covers the sky, which would terrify me. If I had children or pets, I might just lose my damn mind that day on CEO Alan Shaw. Just shelter in place. Are you kidding me? When firefighters started becoming sick, as of course they would, the health department told the fire chief to treat it as if it was a house fire. What I'm about to say next is an opinion, but I think that this chief was a huge scapegoat for this, because of course it's Norfolk Southern's railroad, Alan Shaw. It's their fault. It shouldn't be anyone else's fault. But in this particular situation, they lined it up nicely so they could blame him for actually making the physical decision. Many people were close enough to the burn to where they will have both long-term and short-term effects. Many people evacuated to a school that was 2 miles away from the vent and burn. I've watched interviews with people who live 20 miles from this, and they're experiencing side effects. So you can imagine, the closer you are to the site, that's an increased level of exposure. The EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health, CTEH, have been the primary air, water, and soil testers. The CTEH is a notorious company for, they essentially are paid by companies like Norfolk Southern to do exactly what they're doing in this situation, which is purposefully do incorrect testing for certain chemicals, or not have the right equipment to do certain testing, and then just claiming the chemicals aren't there. When people became skeptical as well, because all these people in their town are becoming sick with similar symptoms, some of the townspeople saw fit to do independent testing, urine testing, and they had benzene in their system. They were testing positive for vinyl chloride, essentially the metabolites of these things, not the actual vinyl chloride itself. Mark Durno, who is an EPA representative, even admitted the tests that they did inside the homes would not find formaldehyde or certain other chemicals without this extension on the device they were using. That is, a purposeful tactic used by the EPA. The CDC was in town for a few days, but they got sick as well. And they didn't even go to the derailment site. They went house to house. And also, when the CDC personnel left town, they began to feel better, which is probably the most common thing to happen to all of the townspeople, depending on what their symptoms are. Like, literally, no matter what their symptoms are. When people leave the town, it's like they essentially have a detox, and then when they come back, they have flare-ups. And I'm also not really sure why that would happen if they weren't being exposed to more toxins. A health clinic was set up by the state of Ohio to offer referrals to toxicology clinics. So you could see a mental health professional, and they were doing like physicals, like very basic physicals as well. They didn't provide prescriptions, vital sign monitoring, symptom diagnosis, or even like blood tests and vital signs. As we talked about earlier, the reason blood and urine is important is the townspeople used their urine tests to show that they were indeed poisoned by something, and the likelihood that these people were poisoned by anything different from other sources, say cigarettes or alcohol, is completely impossible. These people would have to be smoking like 20 packs a day to get that amount of like formaldehyde in their system, per se. Many people were told to just go see their primary doctor, which not everyone has a primary care doctor. So it's pretty safe to say that this wasn't an actual health clinic. People needed immediate blood tests, urine tests, and vital signs, and those things should be checked, over and over and over again for like many, many years to come, because some of these chemicals, they're not going to give you cancer for like 40 years, and some of them, they're going to give you some sort of like instantaneous, like a chemical burn or something like that. I absolutely look at this as a cover-up. Norfolk Southern, the EPA, the CDC, these organizations are to protect the ruling class. They do not serve us. This is a perfect example where you could see that what the billionaires want is the only thing that matters, even if it involves, nuking an entire town with chemicals. It cost them around $1 million a day while the trains weren't moving through the town, so they had a financial incentive to do what they did. Norfolk Southern, completely against EPA regulations and against the chemical manufacturers' direct warning to them, they nuked this town. They nuked several towns, really, because they'll try to convince you that this air just stayed in a mile radius, but that's not how air works. There was tons of dead fish and animals throughout the town. People were completely shocked. 21 animal species were affected. The human cost is, yet to be seen, really. 78 fire departments helped on scene. What about their lives? These people had no idea what chemicals were even there. They had no idea. They were just putting out these fires, breathing, how people, the difference, who knows the difference it would have made if they would have actually been able to, go like full mop suit instead of whatever they did. Walk in there in like Wranglers and start trying to put out a fire. These people are going through hell, and the least we can do is know the truth.